Oh, it's starting to catch up. Walt, we're good.
Are we on? Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Community Redevelopment Agency meeting of August 8th, 2017 at 5:30 p.m. I'll call this meeting to order. We do have a quorum. Is there a minister in the building or in the room? If not, please join me in a moment of silence. Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Our first item is approval of minutes for July 11th, 2017. Do I have any additions or corrections? Not hearing any, I'll accept the motion.
Move to approve the minutes of the July 11th CRA meeting.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Any opposed, like sign, passes unanimously. No special recognitions. Old business, Executive Director.
During the previous year, the concept of building a civic center at Sandpoint Park has been discussed and supported during the city's FY17 strategic planning cycle, both by citizens and by council. In response to council's direction to explore the potential of establishing a civic center. At the December 13, 2016 CRA meeting, Belmo Herbert, the city's continuing services consultant architect, was contracted to prepare a feasibility study for the development of a conceptual design addressing the following aspects of the projects: 2 site locations, environmental review of the site, project cost estimate, and a floor plan. And we have Frank from Belmo to come to speak with you. And just as a reminder, Frank was the gentleman that designed our splash park. So I think it was very successful.
I actually just saw it last week for the first time built.
Oh, really?
Loved it.
It's been very popular.
I'm glad to hear it. It was our pleasure. Director went over what our scope was. A couple other things that we were sort of told before we began the design process is that the building itself should be a minimum of 6,000 square feet. It should have configurable meeting rooms, space, a large space as also a ballroom, and a catering kitchen. And that there needed to be a large...
Sorry, shall I start again?
I think you're okay.
Okay, and there needed to be a large outdoor space for use as an amphitheater for special events, and that space also could potentially be used for farmers market or other public events. The maximum budget that we were told was $4 million for the entire project. And so taking that as our scope, we went out to the site. We did some investigations in terms of what's there and what you can... Are we queued up?
Yes.
There we go. So I wanted to just briefly sort of refresh everybody's memory. I'm sure you all are more familiar with the site probably than I am, but the aerial on the upper left that you see in front of you here and on your monitors is the existing site that we looked at as part of Sandpoint Park over on the water. There's a large shelter that's already in place. There appears to be adequate water, potable water for the development. Power is available. Sanitary is available. There is some stormwater in the area that would kind of need to be shifted around a little bit, but it's nothing that was going to bust the budget by any stretch of the imagination. And so we looked at that portion of the site as the area for the 2 concepts that we developed for the Civic Center and the amphitheater. The photographs on the right are looking towards the south. You can see on the top left, on the top right one, you can see on the very left the bridge in the background. And also at the center of that photograph, that large shelter very much in the distance. And with each photograph going down the sheet on the right side, getting closer and closer to that shelter, I wanted to bring everyone's attention to the lower left photograph. That is an existing condition of that shelter that's there right now, that regardless of what we do, we wanted to make sure that we fixed that little situation, which is that raised patio portion and railing on that shelter is very, very close to what is a pretty good spot for a waterfront promenade, and we wanted to pull it back away from those rails. So that's what we found when we were there. We've done, as we were asked, 2 concepts for the building, which you'll see in a minute. And again, the building, what we were asked to do was just a floor plan for now, so we'll get into that in a second. But let's go ahead and start with concept 1 of the overall site plan, showing the location of the building and the amphitheater itself. So if you look on the left, you'll see what's labeled as expanded parking. You will need to provide some additional parking. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Appreciate that. You will need to provide additional parking, and so in this scheme, we've expanded the existing parking lot. There's also some additional parking that's indicated on the right side, leading to the new Civic Center building. In this scheme, that structure comes out, and here's the reason why we wanted to explore that. We wanted to, as best as possible, leave the view to the river open as much as we possibly could. I think that's going to be pretty much a key, is that we don't have too many structures along the waterfront here, because everything behind where this Civic Center space is shown here, or the existing structure, is where all of your open space is. So that's where all of the folks congregate. The splash pad is actually towards the bottom of this site plan image, and so you want to be able to have a pretty unimpeded view of the water. We thought was important. Now that structure, our architect did look at it. It is possible that you could take that thing down and pretty much unbolt it and at least save the structure. It's a series of glue lam beams, and you could move it elsewhere within the park. You likely would have to re-roof it, but you could certainly consider, and we could investigate more fully if that was something that you wanted to do, the idea of moving that structure if that was of interest. But again, in this scheme, we do show that being removed. The other reason is we really wanted to kind of tuck that Civic Center more towards the corner where it's shown and cock it in such a way that the views out the back and side of that building are just about all glass views out to the water. But again, let's start at the parking lot and go to that sidewalk, which leads you to the right towards the amphitheater and Civic Center. To the left, it connects you to what are 2 existing shelters that are in the park right now. If you continue to the right, I'll talk about the play mound in a second, but if you continue to the right, it leads you to the amphitheater space itself. Now that space is identified strongly by about a 5-foot wide concrete sidewalk and some heavy landscape in terms of some smaller flowering trees and then large palms. We wanted to really strongly define what that space was. You also would enter under 2, what we're showing is 2, we're calling them wave trellises. And without getting into the images of all of the structures out here at this point and in this part of the contract, we are considering that that's a fairly modern looking structure, and that the top of it would actually look a little bit like a wave. And so it backs up the backside of that amphitheater. So if you continue around that walk, you will eventually get to the back of the building where there is an elevated stage. And again, that stage is elevated because the building itself is elevated, because you'll need to elevate the building to get it out of the flood zone. So it's going to sit up, the building itself will sit up about 3 feet, and so the stage will be elevated. We've done projects like this before, and so there will be power on the backside of that stage for just about any type of event that you'd like to have out there. And so whoever's using it will just be able to basically plug in for whatever lights and sound they need. You also could continue, as the design in the future continues on the detail of that building, the overhang above the structure could be such that bands or whomever is out there could hang their own light systems if need be. Let me give you a couple of specifics in terms of this part of the project, or this concept. That amphitheater, if you envision a large crowd to see some event, some band, and everyone's at arm's length, which is not a particularly tightly packed crowd. In this scheme, it's about 1,600 people. If everyone's a little bit more friendly, but still not sitting on top of each other, you'll easily get 2,500 people in that space. So it's a pretty good size space. The other thing that we showed on this scheme And it wasn't part of the scope, and it wasn't part of the program, but we wanted to investigate and have you all think about the idea potentially of locating another small playground directly adjacent to this space. And with that, the play mound. And the reason is because when you've got events, particularly, let's say, a weekend farmer's market or that type of event where families will come, it's always nice to have something for the kids to do. And I'm not sure it's the best idea to have them, either at the splash pad or the other playground because of its distance from this amphitheater. So just for consideration, we'll talk about costs in a little bit, but for just as a thought, and you'll see the second concept, we actually don't have those features. They could easily be added, but we wanted you just to consider it. The play mound itself, we have found in the past that it's really literally that. It's just a mound, a sodded mound, but kids just absolutely love those things. So it's a relatively inexpensive thing for the children and families to do. The other thing as we look at the site plan is that playground then is connected by some specialty paving across that amphitheater to a riverfront promenade. Again, not only does the building want to be on the water, but people want to be on the water. And what's there right now, you saw the obstruction from the existing platform of the existing shelter that's there. But that sidewalk is really pretty narrow. And it would be really nice to have what we're indicating as a 15-foot wide promenade along the water. And then in 2 locations, project out over the water with a boardwalk overlook and a shade structure. Now, the one that's closest to the Civic Center, that overlook then kind of morphs itself into an outdoor event patio. So that becomes a large outdoor space that could be used at the same time that the Civic Center is being used. And we could easily fence and gate that off from the more public portion of that outdoor space. Service is on what is on this image, the downside, the bottom side of that Civic Center, which we would screen with landscape, but you will need some service in that location. And again, the building itself is elevated. Let's go to there we go. Let's take a look then at the floor plan for the scheme that you see for concept 1. And note, again, let me quickly go back. The front door to this building is really where the stage is, so those become steps leading you to that front door, just in terms of context. So on this plan, the architect's floor plan, on the left-hand side is where those doors, you would enter those sets of double doors into a pre-function room. Now, we've labeled stage area. The stage actually is to the left of that side of the drawing. And what you see, those little squares are actually envisioned as a colonnade, and that's exterior covered decking space, or patio. Well, it's not patio space, but it's elevated deck space. Then you'd enter the building into a large pre-function space, and then the overall banquet facility or banquet space itself. Now, that space is, bear with me. The overall space of the indoor banquet facility is 3,114 square feet. To give you an idea of what that will accommodate, if you had, let's say, a wedding in there and people were sitting 8 to a round table, 259 people could be in there. It's a pretty large event. Now, if you go and listen, there's a whole list of stuff in terms of seating types and sizes and shapes of tables. But generally, a round would get you about almost 260. If you went to a rectangular table, you could get more. But it's any way you slice it, it's a large group. If you did an event where you had rows of chairs, you'd get almost 400 people in that space. That would be that entire space. Now, we were asked to provide something that was a little more flexible, so you actually can break this up any of a number of ways, but in its kind of smallest configuration, there would be, as you can see, 4 rooms could have events that were going on simultaneously. Each has its own entrance. There are 2 rooms at about 1,080 square feet, which would handle about 90 people seated at round tables, about 135 in each of those rooms in rows of chairs, and then 2 smaller rooms of 530 square feet, 44 people at tables, 66 in rows of chairs. So it's a very flexible and functional sort of space. On the top side of this drawing, where all the double doors are, that's, for all intents and purposes, that's all glass, looking out over the river. The back side, the right side of the drawing, where room A is shown, that's primarily all glass as well, looking out over the river with the bridge in the background. The sort of back of house type of spaces are those that are on the downside, the bottom of this plan. You can see all the way at the bottom a receiving and storage space that would be adjacent to that service drive that you saw in Concept 1. And you could, obviously catering folks would come in there, would store, would bring all of their equipment and food and what have you in that space. And it also would be additional storage in addition to the large storage space that's shown sort of in the middle of all of those small interior spaces. The reason that you need that much storage is we assume that you'll be storing tables and chairs inside the building. There are 2 small offices for operations that are located, a fairly large kitchen of, as you can see, I think that's 21 or 27 by 16, which is a very large kitchen. We're indicating multiple sinks, cabinets, counter space, and 2 large refrigerators. And it is large enough to handle the type of banquet and the numbers of folks that would be in one or all of those rooms. There are electrical and mechanical rooms, and then a large restroom building to serve the building itself. So that's where we are with Concept 1 in terms of the overall site plan and the floor plan. The total estimated cost of Concept 1 is $3,598,517. So we're actually a little bit under budget. Let's take a look at Concept 2. Now, Concept 2, yeah, we're right here. Yeah, you all can see that. Concept 2 is a tad more respectful of the existing structure. That building stays, as you can see, and it's on the right side. But what you also might note is that the existing elevated patio has been downsized, so that on the bottom of the building on this plan, and north is to the left, by the way, remains, and the side that caused us a little bit of heartburn in terms of how it encroached on the sidewalk at the riverfront has been taken out. We didn't feel like you needed that much exterior space at that building anyway, and it did encroach on the waterfront pretty significantly. The proposed Civic Center, and we'll go over that floor plan in a minute, is now on this plan is to the left. But once again, it overlooks the river and overlooks the amphitheater space itself. So let's go ahead and start from the expanded parking lot again, and that sidewalk leads you to that large amphitheater space, which again we felt was important to strongly identify and delineate by the perimeter walk as well as the palm and small flowering trees, that landscape. If you go to the left, then obviously you're headed right to the Civic Center, and that becomes your main entrance. Those steps become the stage when you have an event. Again, it's an elevated covered porch. There is an event patio. It's a bit smaller than the one in the other scheme, but certainly large enough to allow some of those outdoor events to spill into what would become a private patio. If you go to the right, then you head towards the existing structure that's there. Now, if you can see the light-colored line sort of that's in front of those palms, it comes around and then goes straight along the waterfront. That would be right there. This portion of that, in that location, that portion of that, starts at about 3 feet, equal to the height of the patio at the existing shade structure, and then tapers down basically to 0. And the reason is it gives us the opportunity then to take the back side of that amphitheater and elevate it and turn it into a true amphitheater. Something, again, worth considering. Functions well as an amphitheater, does cut off some of the space that you would have for other events like a farmer's market because of the grade, but it's still a very, very large space. That walk on the bottom of the amphitheater adjacent to or parallel to the wall then ramps up and takes you to that elevated patio deck at the existing structure. As you come through the other side, it ramps you down to this large, really kind of pretty sweeping boardwalk that takes you out over the water and back again. And again, we've created what we think is important, which is that large 15-foot wide promenade. Some additional parking at the existing structure is identified, primarily handicap. We could expand additional parking there if it became necessary. That drive is what's there now, and we've just sort of modified the service area a little bit and cleaned it up and taken out a little bit of there's an excessive amount of asphalt back there. We wanted to sort of clean that up a little bit. That amphitheater space will accommodate, again, arm's length, 2,300 people. This is a bigger space. If everybody gets a little more comfortable, but still ample room between folks, and I'm envisioning families on picnic blankets, that type of thing, 3,400 to 3,500 people. That's a really large group. If we look at this floor plan, then it's, thank you very much. It's very, very similar to the other one. We were really happy with how the architect sort of delineated these spaces, but what we have done now, because of where service is and because of where you're entering that building, the pre-function moves to the other side, all the banquet spaces move down, and you flip the restroom with the kitchen, basically. But you have the same uses, the same spaces. You can accommodate the same amount of folks within the banquet space, whether it's one large banquet or two or four. But again, primarily it's sort of the same layout, but a few things are just reversed. The overall cost of Concept 2 is $3,138,176. So it is about $400,000 or $500,000 less than Concept 1. I would be happy to answer any questions that anyone's got.
I'd like to make a statement just for the record. Some people may have come in late, and this contains no baseball stadium. It has nothing to do with the baseball stadium. There was a move to put a stadium in there before, and I don't want anybody to get it confused.
I didn't miss something in the scope. I didn't miss something in the scope.
No. No. The right one. Yes, go ahead, Joel. I'm sorry.
The additional parking that you're talking about, can you give us an idea of how many parking spaces we're talking about?
If we look at if your basically would be your planning department were to agree and consider it as public community space, you would be required to have an additional 45 spaces.
So that would be 45 more spaces in there.
Correct.
The other question is the pavilion that's there now, do we have an idea of how many square feet that is?
I do not have an idea of what that square. I can get that for you.
That would be interesting. Thanks.
If I can make just a quick comment related to that and the parking issue, I'm reasonably confident that that's what that space would be considered. 45 spaces for 400 people is not going to be enough. Wow. So I think we ought to consider that there probably should be some areas of overflow that would be just green park space at other times, but you'd be able to accommodate larger events within that building.
Member Anderson?
Thank you. The 3.5 in the Plan A, does that include the removal of the current pavilion?
It does. Yes, it does.
Okay.
I have very detailed cost estimates for both, and I'd be happy to share that with anyone that wants to kind of go over them. I didn't think it was necessary to go over them line by line, but it does include all demolition, all earthwork, electrical, stormwater, everything that we could consider to actually get these built, at least at this point in time, with a bit of a fudge factor, because obviously there's a lot of design work that would need to be done. But we're reasonably confident that those numbers would be adequate to do both projects.
Would you provide that to the executive director, and he'll get them to us, please?
Yes.
The other question I have is on the second plan. Are we looking? It's basically you flipped it.
Yes.
On the left side, that would be facing. Boy, I'm turned around on that side. Over where the boats are, is that going to be glass again? So we'd have glass on that side and then glass on the back.
Yeah. Yes. Let me just take a look at concept 2 real quick. The answer is yes, really on all sides. The greatest amount of glass on both schemes faces the water. But on all sides except the service sides, you've got a considerable amount of openings. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And Mayor, I'd like to add, the cost estimates are loaded onto your computer if you'd like to review those, Council.
Okay. All right, thank you. Member Leedy?
What, Executive Director, what are we supposed to weigh in tonight, what we think or feel or ideas? Or?
Yes, sir. What staff's asking the CRA board to do is provide direction on where you would like to take this, which concept you would like us to further develop or start over again.
Well, a couple points that I have, you always, I mean, they're nice plans, but my feeling looking at just right off the top of my head would be, I can't remember if it was one or two, but the one that had the bigger amphitheater.
Yeah,
is that two?
Yeah.
I'm probably not. I can understand why you have a play mound, but I'm not sure that's necessary. Mm-hmm. I would rather see a bigger amphitheater. Mm-hmm. The second thing right off the top of my head is a bigger amphitheater separated from the Civic Center. Why do you have a concept that I saw in Commissioner Fisher's office years ago had the stage on the riverside where people were looking at the river and the stage was in front of the river. If I look at this where you have people, if somebody's performing on, the Beach Boys are here performing on stage, I'm not looking at the river, I'm looking at the Civic Center. Mm-hmm. And my idea, what he had was the amphitheater separated from the Civic Center, and then in between that was like walkways, picnic tables. I'd say to the city staff, those, help me out, those kites or those things we put downtown? Sails. I mean, and looks to me like on the concept where the Civic Center's on the left side, mm-hmm. You're looking at the stage and into an old boatyard instead of our beautiful river. And the one that I've got up now where the Civic Center, I mean, it just seems to me I'm looking at a building in the background, and I would rather look at the river with the stage in front of the river.
Okay, we can investigate that.
I believe your second concept, the stage, is pointing the other way. It's pointing towards the river.
No, well, can we look at that? It's the stage on your chart there. You're looking at towards the dog park and the marina. You're not looking at the river. And I think by doing it on the, as I said, on the one over here, mm-hmm. I'd tear down the existing structure, make the amphitheater bigger, and move it more to the right. Okay. And put the stage and make it, unless it's this council's idea, you want to have this to be a multi-purpose facility was the whole idea for markets or an amphitheater. I don't think we ever even discussed that, have we?
No, not that I remember.
Can I ask you all a question, which would help guide me as we kind of tweak these things a little bit? There's a difference between a simple stage and a stage with a back of house. And there's a difference between the type of stage that will handle local talent and the type of stage that would handle, for example, the Beach Boys. So if you are interested in a separate freestanding stage with a large back of house and restrooms and everything associated just with that facility, we can certainly show that. What it will do is it will actually, in some respects, block at least a portion of the view of the river if, in fact, its back is to the river. We wanted to take advantage of interior spaces of the Civic Center when the stage is in use, because it's not assumed that you're going to have, for example, a wedding or a banquet while you've got a couple of thousand people at a concert. The thought being you would probably, and you do this with a stage on the water as well, you'd probably have a scrim or a large curtain that would come down that would basically block the back of the doors and the glass of the Civic Center, and it becomes your back of the stage drop. If you just want an elevated stage, no back of house, then you can also certainly do that. Likely when you have an event, you may want to scrim that as well, but it wouldn't be a permanent structure. So it depends on how far you want to take the idea of the stage, what type of events you want, that will guide us towards the extent that that stage becomes, more than just a platform for lights and sound and events. We just need that direction.
Yeah, just to finish my thoughts, and that's exactly right. And it seems to me, before we've never discussed this as a board, what kind of facility, the purpose of this facility. Is it just an amphitheater? Are we doing other stuff? So that ties into what you just said. And then number two, before the meeting I asked you, having your stage at ground level, the amphitheaters I've been in, and I'm originally born and raised in Seattle where there's a lot of water, the seats are elevated.
Sure.
And all the seats are facing the water. Mm-hmm. So maybe that's a concept you can show us also. If the seating is like natural grass and it's elevated and people come into an amphitheater and sit and watch.
Correct. So, and again, this is a little bit of direction that I need. So when you're talking about an amphitheater, it can be everything from a flat green space, which in this instance, because we were told it also should be considered for farmers markets and other public events, ideally would be a flat space. Or we could adjust some of these walls, as we talked about, to get a little bit of grade change, which leads you more towards what a true amphitheater is. The other thing is you can then take it a step further, which is have fixed seating. And now you're really talking about a completely different animal. Absolutely doable, but cost begins to become a concern. That's the type of facility when you normally would do a very sophisticated stage, a very sophisticated back of house for that stage, and at least some fixed seating, potentially with open grassed seating, beyond that. We just need to know what it is. Our thought, based on the scope we were given, and maybe it was a poor assumption on our part, was that it was a multi-use, flexible building amphitheater, sort of co-joined. But we could split them up any way you want, as long as we know the direction that you want to take this thing and how far you want to take it.
Anything else, Kirk?
No, I guess still
Okay. Member Diesel?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thank you for the presentation. Mm-hmm. I feel much more informed about kind of a vision. I'm a vision guy, and I really feel like there's a couple of really good visions out there. I also feel like a lot of attention was paid to river view, the view of the river for people. We know that's a serious concern for many people to put anything on the river. I think that the river is enhanced by what I see in both proposals, and I think the river gets more attention. I think that Kurt makes a good point, and perhaps maybe we can point in a different direction. However, I also feel like with as much river around us, I feel like the river is there for us no matter what direction we're facing. So I don't want that to be a game breaker, but I think it's a well thought out philosophy. The problem I have, and I don't think it's really any part of what you do, is just like downtown, where we do all we can to bring people downtown, and downtown is a focal point for us, and we spend a lot of time talking about getting people downtown, but we've got to be able to park people. And parking is, I'm looking at some of these numbers. Amphitheater 1 could be 2,500 people. That's a lot of people in a fairly small area. 3,500 is even more people. Mm-hmm. And if we're going to talk about the entire experience, it's kind of like going to an athletic event or downtown Dr. Phillips, whatever it may be. The first thing you say is, where do we park? How do we get there? How inconvenient is it? How far away are we? And I think we go to a whole nother realm of we really need to discuss where we're going to put cars and people when they're trying to get there. I certainly hope that when we get to a civic center and perhaps some performances that would enhance 3,500 people or more to come to it, that we're not asking them to walk across the highway because they got to park in the old parking lot across the street. I think we've got to think of the whole experience, not just how good that looks on paper, because it does. It looks great. They both look great. But when I start thinking about the cars in line and the 4th of July fireworks and the things that I can compare to this as far as 3,500 people, et cetera, we have got to plan out parking before we go too far. Now, that being said, I do think you've done great consideration to the river views, and I want that stated because I know there was a lot of people concerned about that. I'm looking at 2 very river view enhancements to me, and I appreciate your efforts.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Chair. I think I have 2 or 3 questions, a comment, and then I hope to reserve a few comments for the end as well, if that's all right, Chair. So, one, can you just go a little bit or just talk to us with specificity about, Member Diesel made a point of how do we preserve as much waterfront view, direct view as possible. Can you talk us through some of the considerations you took into design that incorporated that idea of protecting as much direct view riverfront for the person not in the building?
Well, I mean, the first thing to consider was the existing structure that was there and the desire to not add another one. And so that's why I didn't know what the sort of temperature of the CRA and council was going to ultimately be to take that structure out. But ideally, we would, if you're only considering riverfront view, that was important to us. We then really wanted to take that structure and sort of tuck it closer to the boat ramp and get it away as much as possible from the more expansive view. The remainder of this is reasonably flat. Trees would be trimmed up. Palm trees shouldn't obstruct much of a view. So we were a little sensitive to that. The play mound is not particularly high. We wanted, again, to have, you will have some filter views through the landscape here, but not anything that's going to completely block your view. So in concept 1, it was really a matter of taking that hard structure and pushing it back as far as we could. Concept 2 was a matter of taking, if you all were going to say, well, we really need to leave that structure there, was taking that second hard structure and pushing it as far as we could close to the parking lot where it's shown now, so that we had at least a giant hole that would align with the overall open space of the park and let you kind of view the river. I would also say, as I think about it, that one of the positive aspects of number 2, which is the 2 buildings, is the ease of access of the Civic Center itself from those that visit and park in these adjacent parking lots. The downside to concept 1 is most of your parking is on the other side of the open space, and it's a bit of a walk. But back to the views, concept number 2 was really a matter of trying to spread those 2 out as far as possible.
Thank you. And for City Manager, you might be able to help me out. So the Coast Guard has their auxiliary building over there. Do they own that property, or is that ours?
No, sir, we own it.
So we own it, and that would, just from a site selection standpoint, I don't know. I know, good folks went out there and painted the building and spruced it up a bit a few years ago. But as far as both functionality and use of space, there's nothing incredibly impressive to me about that facility. So I wonder if the other concept might be, can we potentially ask them if they would like to shift out of the park and then potentially use that for site selection for this spot as well. So that would be another one that I would be interested in. And then as far as any additional comments as well, just on the existing structure and capacity for the use of events and, what's the temperature. I'll share with you regarding farmers markets, I respectfully, those to me doesn't drive me for a $4 million project, because what I believe that is our area doesn't have the capacity to produce a solid farmer's market. I think we can go buy crates of vegetables and set them up, but it's not something we're going to 7 different farms pulling something. And I just don't think that we have the infrastructure to pull that off in the way that I think people hope to. Being said, so I'm not interested in a hot dog and a honey guy and a
Sure.
Right, the Publix tomatoes out in the park. I'm not too worried about that. As far as the removal of the structure, one of the concerns, and I'm for council's frame of reference, this past year we had a Mardi Gras out at Sandpoint Park, and I'm kind of using that as a barometer of capacity and maximizing space and what's it feel like, or so forth and so on. A couple of things that I personally learned from that. One is that to remove the kitchen found in the pavilion, which is a fully functioning kitchen, takes away half the capacity. So if somebody books an event on wedding at the Civic Center and they're in the kitchen and they're catering, then if somebody else wanted to use the public space and use the kitchen, we could have two simultaneous events going on as well, and we would immediately lose that by ripping out that full service kitchen. So just a consideration of how much capacity we'd like the park to have. I think you brought up a great point. The reality of whoever's managing this, we've got a weekend and I'm blowing out a show. How's that going to impact the events that are going on inside? I think that that's a valid concern. So from the design, having the amphitheater right next to the building, I'm 50-50, because the practical reality is that if it's a big one, I don't care what you do, you're not going to stop the noise on that. If it's a moderate kind of low deal, then those are simultaneous and could be used to build on each other. So I'm a little bit concerned about that. And then the last part, from a design structure, and this is totally a personal preference, and indulge me while I can. But one of the things I've discussed, I think this concept in Orlando, there's Lou Gardens, and I think that concept nowhere close to the extent of what they have going on over there. But if we stole the Rose Garden out of Lou Gardens and incorporated that into a chunk of this, what I think is that we would use an enhancement to natural beauty, and something that would also, if I'm walking across the parking lot or across from one spot to the next, that while I'm walking, it's not just hot and I'm looking at the river, there's something else that I can walk through that's in closer proximity. And that's why I think it would be important to incorporate something like that that would be kind of substantial as you're walking through that. And then lastly is additional to parking. As far as parking, I'm not too concerned about that. And the rationale for that is that depending on the size of the event, if there's a reasonable amount of parking just for, if I'm doing a wedding, right, and I got 200 people, is there parking in the ballpark to where I'm not parking downtown to walk to a wedding? And I think that we're there. I think that if you're having a bigger show than that, and it's something that's pretty big, then I think that the infrastructure that we built into the walking lanes, the green striping, the whole shebang, I think that that's kind of expected if you're going to a major event from overflow. So I'm not too concerned about that. So that's just some comments.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Member Nelson.
Well, I have to say I like concept number one. And Mr. Diesel, I'm going to disagree with you here. The thing is, if you have the stage on the north side of the building, then you're allowing that breeze to come in over the water and keep those poor people that are out in the heat cool, access and air conditioning. So I sort of get why you would do that. Yeah, it would be nice to have both, but you can't really do both. I don't see how you could do both. I do like the idea of having the amphitheater sloped, at least a little bit. But more than that, I live near the park, and our mayor does too, and I think there's a lot of misperception right now about what we are trying to do. And so really, before we go further, I would like to see the public weigh in. I got stopped today, oh my God, you're going to overrun the park, you're going to put a stadium in the park. And I'm trying to tell people, and this is one of the reasons I asked you about the pavilion, the size of the pavilion. I said, my understanding is we're about the size of the pavilion, maybe a little bit bigger. We're not taking over the whole park. We're not trying to take over the whole park. But I think that would calm some of their fears. So that would be my thought. And they're going to be asking about parking. They're going to be going, oh, gee, where are all these people going to park? They're going to park on our property and then walk across the street. So that would be my suggestion, is that we get some public input.
Thank you. Member Diesel?
Just to clarify, I actually was just complimenting Member Leedy. I thought it was a good thought that, what you're looking at, but I also followed that with, it's not a deal breaker. I think there's enough river view. You look right, you look left, you got river. And having been a football coach for a long time, I know the breeze off the river is real important. It gets really hot. And so it's just not a deal breaker. I thought Mardi Gras was a good bring up. I still would like to think that we're moving a level higher when we're having an amphitheater concert or an amphitheater play. I'm originally from St. Louis, and my aunt goes to the Muni Opera all the time. I do think that when you're doing something like that, you'd like to have a little bit better parking. And I'm not saying we're going to add a parking garage to this. I think it's something we need to think about if we're going to go with the total experience. And the total experience is how you get there, where you park, how far you walk, and those kind of things. Now, again, if you got the Beach Boys there, we're all in our shorts and T-shirts ready to go. But if we do get to the point where there's some possibilities of some Muni Opera type of plays, and I'd love to see us get to that area, I'd like to think that we're prepared to have some sort of parking that picks us up just a little bit. But I will say, again, I hadn't thought of that the Mardi Gras certainly stretched that park's capacity to its most. And I also agree with Vice Mayor Behringer's thought about the kitchen at the pavilion that we have now. I think an awful lot of things could go on there simultaneously with the kitchen ability over there, and along with the Civic Center just a little bit away. So I kind of favor that design.
Thank you. The speakers coming up, please be brief because we're running out of time. Member Leedy.
Just briefly, I want to comment on what Member Nelson said. I agree with her. I think that I think we're designing something we haven't discussed what our need is, and I would like to see. I didn't realize, quite frankly, that people knew about this. I've been stopped and called on this project alone, saying, "What are you doing?" And I'm going, I think we're talking about a civic center, and then I see this. So I think we got the kind of maybe the cart before the horse here, and that we need to discuss as a board what my point versus the Beach Boys, having said that, is, do you want a $4 million project, or do you want something that's maybe even more grandiose than that? Because it seems to me, if you want entertainment, and you mentioned it, Dan, not just the Beach Boys, but opera and some other things, then to get the artists to our town, you probably need to have a facility that's going to work for them also. So that kind of discussion is going to be, I think we need to have, and I know we can't have it tonight, but that's my... and have input from the public, because the public is tuned into this.
Member Stokel?
Thank you. When you were developing your concept map for this, were you able to look at the green space to see potential parking spots if we roped them off and had parking attendants and whatnot, or was that not part of it?
No, we didn't look at the entire park because that really wasn't part of it. But we did look at adjacent parking areas where we could expand enough to at least meet code requirements. But everyone is right. I mean, if you're going to do an event out there where there are thousands, you're talking about trying to find open space. And I'd like to know how they did it at Mardi Gras. You're going to have to find open space.
I'm happy to work with that.
Right, and you'd probably do shuttles. I mean, there's all sorts of ways that you can accomplish that. But no, we didn't step back and look at the entire park.
Okay, and then my second question was, should we want to have an event going on in the amphitheater as well as the Civic Center? Maybe not two huge events, but should we want that? Is there, with the Civic Center, is there another entrance that's not like, I think I see a service entrance on here that's welcoming, or is it just more so back doors that you have built in?
I mean, there are other ways, depends on the scheme, but there are other ways to get into the building. I mean, you can see on both scheme, well, if you look at concept one, there is a side entrance and several doors into the building. and on the other, your main entrance is actually on the opposite side of the stage. So there are opportunities, both where you could be active on stage and still be utilizing the building. I would suggest that whatever event is on the stage is a relatively small one.
Right. Okay. All right, thanks.
Member Anderson.
Thank you. I do agree with Vice Chair Behringer that farmers markets are not on the hip parade with these things. We just haven't been able to do it, so I'd really like for us not to think that that's going to be something. I'm glad we're moving from markets to opera. It makes me very happy. I do like the first plan because I want it to be grand. I want it to look really nice and be impressive. And I don't think you can have everything, which would be basically you got 3 arenas. And I don't think 3 arenas in that area, I don't think it's big enough for 3 arenas. We don't have enough land. So I really think that the plan that gives us the most river view and gives us the inside and outside the building would be my my choice. And I don't like the idea of looking out that building and seeing those boats. At this point, that's what we're looking at. So unless something was to change on that, I want it to be someplace where people are going to go. I want my child's wedding there.
Sure.
And it to be something to be very proud of. I would also like to not call it a civic center. It'd be nice to call it an event center, because when I think of a civic center, I think of a building that people have. It's been a lot of different things, and then God bless them, they put in a civic center in there and hold bingo. That's not what I'm looking at. So maybe an event center might be a better wording. But I'm real excited about it, and I think both plans are really nice. But my first gut reaction is the first plan. I think that would be perfect.
Vice Chair.
Thank you.
And thank you, sir. Just a couple on the specifics. So one, I like the play mound, and whether it is in that spot or in a different spot, I could care less. But it looks inexpensive. It's dirt and a hill, and kids like that.
It doesn't get much cheaper than that.
That's awesome. No critiques on the structure itself, so I'm comfortable either way with that. On the amphitheater section, I would the raised level or the raised backing, so there's a slope. That's would be my preference. It's clearly defined and it gives you that feel. Mm-hmm. And if we lose counts on space, I would be happy to deal with that later. And then the other one is that in design, the only other thing is that we as a city, we don't pay for bands to come, which means somebody has to make money on this, mm-hmm. and they'll have to have the ability to close down access and charge, right? So yes. that's going to be a function. So from a design, if you, in your design structure, whatever way we're going, I will have questions in the future of how do I close this off to secure this area to make money, right? Because as an investor who's putting $15,000 out for a band and production, remember, Lee, you bring up a good point. I don't think the infrastructure that we're going to put in itself is going to allow itself for grand production. That's what production companies are for. So if it's a flat surface with whatever, then you're into it for a production company with lights and sound and XYZ, right? So that's on. So if you give us the bones to that, I think it's the purveyor's responsibility from that point. But showing me how you can close it off from a business
Sure.
standpoint, I would be interested to know.
If I can add to that, I've actually done events as a volunteer, large. Most of you probably don't remember an event in Orlando called Light Up Orlando, but I actually chaired it for a couple of years, and we had major national talent. And I know what their needs and their requirements are. You're not going to invite those people on this stage, either of these in this design. We can do it. You need to understand in terms of the dollars what you're getting yourselves into. This is more, this space would function well for a mid-size to smaller local sort of event and group. If you wanted the Beach Boys, you would and could easily bring in a stage. We used to do all basically production-built stages. They have their own sound requirements. They have their own light requirements. We would make sure that there is infrastructure, that there's enough power on site for them. And that is more than likely what they would do, and they would probably set up with their back to the river. You all need to hopefully give us a little bit of direction that, yes, we do want a really first-class stage with a back of house that's separate from the Civic Center. If that's what you with fixed seating, without fixed seating, whatever it is that you all decide you want, if you give us that direction, we can make it happen. I can see just standing here and listening to you, kind of thinking in my head that we could probably provide an area closer to the river that could potentially end up as outdoor patio plaza space that could double as a much larger platform for a temporary stage if somebody wanted to bring in a big national type of act. And we could look at that and investigate it and bring it back to you. Right. But if there's anything above and beyond that you want as a permanent, just let us know and we'll try and make that happen.
I would share you personally, I'm not of that inclination, because if I'm bringing in that act, it's not coming to Titusville. I'm going to take it to Orlando, or I'm going to take it to Cocoa Beach, or I'm going to take it, because from financially,
sure,
I'm going to draw more. And that's not, just respectfully, that's my own personal opinion. And then additionally, the boardwalk, the structure in the river, I could do without.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, well, it's very interesting, all the information you've got to put together. Some of it won't go together with some of the other ones, but I would like to say two things. One is I agree with the Vice Chair on two issues. One was the last one, a big name band. Today, I'm somewhat aware of it. I'm on the Tourist Development Council, and that Runaway Country came out of South Brevard, and I followed that. And the numbers that any kind of name entertainment gets today requires a great deal of audience to support that number. So I agree with you. I don't think that is for us. The other thing I agree, and I heard two people say, if the existing building, it gets a pretty good amount of use for all kinds of things. It's not a big formal building, but I've been to weddings in there and birthdays and all kinds of events. And the event that the Vice Chair mentioned was in there. So it is a very functional building. I know it's old, but maybe it could be retained and reconditioned. So I would look at that very seriously. Other than that, I thank you for
Thank you all very
coming,
much.
And if you don't have any questions for us, and I suspect you don't at this point, I thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Mr. Executive Director.
Yes, sir. The Legacy Academy Charter School grades K through 6 is proposing to locate temporarily at storefront units located at 205 South Lemon Street, units located at 412 and 414 Main Street. The site is located in the downtown mixed-use DMU downtown sub-district zoning district. Section 29-255A of the Land Development Regulation permits public schools with limitations in the DMU downtown sub-district. Location meets all of the limitations with the exception of Section 255C2C, which states shall be required to have frontage and all access from collector or higher roadways unless Community Development Agency approves access from a lower roadway classification. Main Street, Lemon Street, and Palm Avenue, where the building site has access, are not classified as collector or arterial roadways. Legacy Academy Charter School is requesting the CRA approve to locate the school at the proposed location with access to local streets.
Thank you, sir. Well, what's your, let's have some discussion on this. What's your pleasure, Council? Oh, go ahead. You're the only one there.
I'm the only one here. I don't have a problem with it. My understanding is they have about 190 kids. That is an area where they had a preschool previous to this, and my understanding is they had a similar amount of kids there. So to me, it's not a problem to do this.
Okay. Member Anderson?
Okay, I'm a little confused. The buildings at the address at 412 and 414 are not going to hold 200 students. Those are really small. It's at the other end of cruisers. Are we talking about that, approving that? 412 and 414 Main Street units, storefronts, versus the church, which is what everybody's talking about.
The charter school is currently located completely within the youth building of the church. It is their intent to put at least to use at least 2 of those small units as classrooms for some of the grades. Their original intent was to have some of the kids in the cruisers building and some of the kids in the youth building. When they came to us, we told them that because it was a change of occupancy in the cruisers building, that there was significant number of improvements that had to be made to meet the building code. Okay. So they reconfigured their use of the youth building, and they are using that, but their preference is to have children in both places.
Okay. Thank you. That makes a lot more sense. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Member Stokel?
Thanks for coming up. That was going to be my question for you. Have you guys seen any issue with this request at all?
As far as actually being on the school, I mean the access, no, it was simply formality that it had to be approved by this agency.
Okay. Then, yep, I'm all for it.
Vice Chairman.
Thank you. So the only question I have is not on the school itself, or whether it is relative to law enforcement and enhancement of penalties in proximity to schools. So if there's some really bad activity that's happening not very far away, how do we address that? I'm just from a plan for maybe for city manager.
Yes, sir. The schools are permitted in that zone now.
Okay.
So what we're asking is, will this board accept the ability to go off non-collector road?
Which that I understand. My concern being is that if schools are there, expanding the school further towards a direction where I'm of the opinion that there is some activity going on that is not good for kids to be around. Are there additional steps that need to be taken, or are there additional steps being taken in order to make sure that the expansion of that to that direction?
There are additional steps being taken.
All right, perfect. All right, thank you.
We began that in the early summer months.
Awesome. Thank you, sir.
Okay, that's everyone. I see no problem with it. This is supposed to be a temporary arrangement anyway, right? Until they're...
As they build out their structure at the old Publix building.
Right. So I see no problem with it. What's your pleasure?
I'd make a motion to approve having the public school at the 412 and 414 Main Street. And
That's it.
is that good?
I have a motion. I have a second. All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Any opposed, like sign, passes unanimously. Next item is petitions and requests from the public. Does any of the public wish to speak at this point? This is only on CRA issues now.
On that school?
Yeah.
I still see the girls walking.
Well, you got to come up, sir, and give your name.
I got a house on Garden Street.
Can you push that button? Yeah, please.
Sorry. My name's Carl Krupp. I got a property on Garden Street, and where he's talking about for that school, I still see the girls walking the streets. I see the drug deals going on in front of the Napa store. It's right at the school. And yes,
I think
you're
what
right.
he indicated is they are taking action on that because we have all kinds of tourists coming in there.
Yeah, I know, but I saw 3 of them yesterday.
He didn't say
right
he
there.
had taken it. He said he's taking it.
I know,
Okay.
but they're not going to get rid of it.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else want to speak? If not, Executive Director, your report, sir?
Yes, sir. No action items, and there's 4 updates on our capital projects in the downtown area, and as well as the ongoing projects for your consideration.
Okay. Anything from the members? I see none, so I think we're through with our needs. So I'll declare this meeting over, and we'll meet in 10 minutes at 6:45. Reconvene.